today we are going to be going over our power rankings for week 13 of the 2024 NFL season. The first group we have is the Giants at 32, the Jags at 31, the Patriots at 30, and the Raiders at 29. Now, this is kind of like, I think, the first little group here, the group of teams that one of these teams I think are very likely to end up with the first pick. I have the Giants at 32 below the Jags. I know the Jags didn't play and they were at 30, but I just think the Giants are the worst team. I would take the Jags over the Giants in a head-to-head match. And then I have the Patriots at 30. Although Drake May has showed you a ton of flashes, they're just not a good team. And honestly, same with the Raiders. Although Brock Bowers have showed you flashes, they're also not a great team. And I think those two are interchangeable, just like the Jags and Giants are interchangeable. But they're all towards the bottom anyway. Next group is the Browns at 28, the Panthers at 27, the Cowboys at 26, the Jets at 25, the Bears at 24, and the Titans at 23. Browns at 28, coming off a big win versus the Steelers. On Thursday night, the snow game with Jameis Winston. I didn't want to move them too high because they just haven't been great overall. And the Panthers, although they lost to the Chiefs, they almost lost to the Chiefs. Bryce Young went toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes, and they've played very solid football over the last 3 games. So I didn't want to move them too low for almost beating the Chiefs. But I also wanted to put the Cowboys above them, although I think the Panthers could potentially beat the Cowboys. The Cowboys did beat the Commanders, and you got to give them credit for that. It was a good win. Cooper Rush actually played pretty decent. So I wanted to move them up. However, I think the Jets have been, although they haven't been great, I think they've been more consistent than the Cowboys, as well as a team like the Bears who lost to the Vikings. And that's kind of why the Cowboys are still at 26, although they did have a very impressive win. And then again, the Jets, I don't think they played. They just haven't looked great. Bears also haven't been a great team. They have been very good in their last 2 divisional games versus the Packers and the Vikings. And then the Titans at 23, I think, deserve a big boost after having a very impressive win versus the Texans. Their O-line did not really help Will Levis out, but he stood in there, stood in the game, and they ended up having a big win. I think it deserved a big spot, a big jump to 23. Next group, Saints at 22, Colts at 21, Rams at 20, and the Bengals at 19. Saints didn't play, so I didn't feel the need to move them. Colts at 21. They gave the Lions the closest loss it felt like they've had in the last 4 weeks. Richardson's looked pretty good in his since coming back, so I didn't want to punish them too much for hanging in there with with the best team in football right now, the Detroit Lions. Rams at 20. I know it was a blowout loss to the Eagles, but the Eagles are potentially a top 3 team in football, maybe even number 2. So you can't give them too much slack for that. And then I know the Bengals didn't play, but I think the teams above them have just overall or recently have looked better than they have. But I couldn't lower them too much because they didn't play. Next is the Falcons at 18, the Dolphins at 17, the Bucks at 16, and the Niners at 15. Falcons, another team that didn't play, but I just wanted to give the Dolphins credit. I know they beat the Patriots, but Tua's looked great since coming back from his injury. The offense has looked a lot better, and their defense is still playing well, so I wanted to give them credit. Bucks at 16. I know they got swept by the Falcons, but I don't want to have that keep being a reason. If the Bucks keep playing well, they keep playing well. I know it was against the Giants, but Baker looked great. The offense looked great. Their defense actually played good again against the Giants. And then the Niners at 15. I know I already moved them 5 spots, but I didn't want to move them even further because they didn't have Brock Purdy. They've had injuries. I know they haven't been very consistent, but I think when healthy, they're still a very good football team, and they still could end up winning the NFC West. Next group is the Cardinals at 14, the Seahawks at 13, the Commanders at 12, and the Texans at 11. Gave the Seahawks, it was the Seahawks and Cardinals were interchangeable, so I gave them that little nod above the Cardinals as they beat them. Both teams have looked very good throughout most parts of the season. Commanders and Texans at 12 and 11. It was tough to decide because they both came off disappointing loss. The Commanders to the Cowboys and the Texans to the Titans. But the Commanders have been a bit shaky recently. Um, and the Texans, I think, have just been a little bit better than the Commanders as of recent. And they were ranked higher to begin with. They were 9 while the Commanders were 11. So I thought it was good to keep them. I thought it was fair to keep them still above the Commanders as they were higher. And they have been slightly better as of late. Next group is the Broncos at 10, the Chargers at 9, the Steelers at 8, and the Vikings at 7. So the Broncos and Chargers were interchangeable to me. Broncos coming off of a very good win over, I know it was the Raiders, but overall, Bo Nix has looked great recently, especially in that game versus the Falcons. And I know the Chargers did lose to the Ravens, and it was a pretty bad loss, at least for the most part. I know they had that one touchdown late. But I kept them above the Broncos because, one, they were at 12 going into this week and lost to the Ravens, who are a top 5 team, and the Broncos were 15th, and they only beat the Raiders, who were 30th going this week, by 10 points. And I think the Chargers have just looked a little bit better than the Broncos, but again, could be interchangeable. Steelers at 8, Vikings at 7. Steelers coming off of a very tough loss to the Browns. Still a very good team. Mike Tomlin will have his trap game where he'll just lose to a team he shouldn't lose to. It's just to be expected at this point. And then the Vikings, I know Sam Darnold and that team haven't looked great recently. They still did win, so I didn't want to put them below a team like the Steelers or the Chargers for winning. So I just thought best thing to do is just to keep them at 7. And then we have the Packers at 6, the Ravens at 5, and the Chiefs at 4. Packers, big win versus the Niners. I know they didn't have Brock Purdy, but I think it just shows that this Packers team as a whole is actually very good and are one of the best teams in the league. Ravens at 5, dominating win versus the Chargers. Not dominating, but a relatively easy win versus the Chargers on Monday night. Thought they deserved that 5 spot. I know they looked a lot better than the Chiefs did, and the Chiefs barely beat the Panthers, who are towards the bottom. They still, again, just like the Vikings, they still did win, and they've played good football overall. I know they've had a lot of close wins, but they're still winning games. So I wanted to keep them at 4. However, I just think that teams like the Eagles at 3, the Bills at 2, and the Lions at 1 deserve to be above the Eagles, or above the Chiefs, as the Eagles had their very impressive win over the Rams. Bills didn't play, but they're still very good, and they beat the Chiefs last time they did play. And then the Lions are, of course, clearly the best team in the league right now. I think the Lions are at 1 is obvious. Bills and Eagles interchangeable at 2 and 3. Ravens and Chiefs interchangeable 4 and 5. And then maybe 6 through 10 is interchangeable. But let me know what you think of these power rankings. And as usual, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you leave a like in the comment section. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you guys in the next video next time. Peace.